Hey everybody, I'm Francesca Maxime and this is WiseGirl, and it's WiseGirl Live actually, and I'm continuing to play with the settings on these whatever cameras and stuff like that to try and figure out how to best do this live for y'all. It's just after 11 on Tuesday morning, and I think I'm sort of starting to feel settled back in to being back in New York after the vacation that I had over the holidays with family in Boston, which was great. So what I'm talking about today is actually responding to a viewer question, sort of an inquiry about hope for the future, trying to figure out how to really sort of stick to the goals or ideas that I had alluded to in my last Facebook Live chat on Friday evening, which concerned mindful eating and sort of the decisions that we make and kind of what's underneath those decisions that we make in terms of our core beliefs about ourselves that we may or may not actually have sort of our own best interest at heart or our own little cheering squad sitting on our shoulder. We may actually have a critical squad in our camp, in our corner, trying to tell us what to do about our food. So very specifically, in response to this particular viewer question, it was a question about losing weight, living a healthier lifestyle, and having difficulty having hope in the future, not only about one's personal resolutions and attempts to be healthier, but also just sort of in the world, that hope and, this whole idea of whatever's happening in terms of, politics in the country or different, things that are happening politically outside of that, for example, in regards to race and policing and implicit bias and a variety of other things that are happening that we all want to address, global warming, that this person is finding it difficult to have hope and is certainly saying that, this person doesn't feel like they're alone probably in this. So I wanted to read the definition of hope here and sort of talk about why I think the word hope itself is a bit problematic and why it might be more beneficial to establish faith or trust. And faith, I mean in a non-religious context here, but just a faith in something greater. And hope, I mean rather in trust in really something that you can anchor and root within yourself. Hope, this is just a standard definition from the dictionary, a feeling of expectation and desire for a certain thing to happen. Let me just sort of tell you or share with you or invite you to consider how this works for you. When I look at an expectation, a desire for a certain thing to happen, there's a few problems or issues that arise with that. One is having an expectation. Having an expectation that something specific will happen means that I have an attachment to something. An expectation means that I already have in my head an idea of what it is that's actually going to happen. So what that means is I'm not actually living in the present moment, first of all. I'm living in the future. So whatever's happening that is in my head is attached to some idea that I concocted probably, and then I have hope, which means I've pinned a positive spin on it, meaning I have an attachment, I have a desire, and possibly even a craving for this particular thing to manifest at some point. So we pin our hopes on certain things, and then if those things don't actually happen, then we feel really let down. For example, I know that I have several friends who felt that way about what happened in November, and I am speaking about the election, and I know that a lot of people very much felt paralyzed and destabilized by the whole situation, and some of them are still very, sorrowful and feeling quite catatonic in a way over the situation, and other folks of course are rising and becoming very active and using their voices in different ways, and there's nothing good or bad about that. I'm not going to get into politics, I'm just using it as an example. So when we look at hope and we look at what it really means, we're looking at the roots of hope being pinned to something in the future, something that's not actually happening right now, and that you have a certain idea of what it is that will happen and that you want to have happen. So that's really kind of problematic right there, because all of the teachings that I've been studying and the way that I've been trying to look at the world that has worked for me for the last couple of years that I'm sharing with you, that's based on Buddhist teachings, is more along the lines of living in the present moment, not attaching to anything in particular, while still fully enjoying good things as they come up, putting in effort and wise effort when needed, as opposed to striving and having this sort of idea of success based on separation and competition and achievement, and really just sort of saying, what is it that I can do now? If I were fully to be alive right now, and I were fully to inhabit my own life right now, and I were to fully look at my life right now, what is it that I would have in front of me? So we can start with basic things like, am I okay, right? Now, clearly, some of us are in better circumstances than others in terms of safety, security, shelter. Some of us have had different exposure to education. This isn't a comparison game in that regard. What I'm trying to say is that most of us, for the for the day-to-day, we're okay. We have food to eat, a roof over our head. Hopefully we're generally healthy. So where do we go from here in terms of how we feel right now, and recognizing that there's a certain amount of gratitude that we can have for what is in front of us at the moment, and then we can use that gratitude in a way to not so much have hope for the future that something may be different or that things may change, but rather to instead start to place faith and trust in the present moment and in our own process of discovery, in our own process of curiosity, and in our own process of really getting curious and being open to any kind of insights that may arise as we look at the world and as we look at situations with new eyes, beginner mind, and start to see what's actually before us. We're not living so much in the past or in the future, which means we don't really get too caught up in ruminations, and we also don't get too caught up in projections and anxiety. Okay, great. I'm looking at the I'm looking at the little comments that are coming in. So let's look at the definition of faith and the definition of trust as opposed to that of hope. Faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or in something. I'll repeat that. Faith is complete trust or confidence in someone or something. Now, I'm not going to talk about faith in a religious context, although for some of you it may be that, and that's perfectly fine. I will say that my work is grounded in a spiritual context, but I really don't think that there's any particular religion that it necessarily has to adhere to, because I do think that kind of all roads lead to Rome in the circumstances that I'm talking about, in terms of there being universal truths and sort of things that experientially people over millennia have discovered to kind of continue to manifest as the truth, meaning that there is sort of a way in which, because we're all interdependent and interrelated, that things are in sync. And when we're often out of sync, like we're not eating mindfully, or we are, more than our weight should be, or we are more than our meaning for our body size, that we are somehow not in sync with that interdependence. And, that's kind of just a signal to tell us something, to say, hey, maybe you want to pay a little bit attention to this and see if we can't do anything about it that's healthier for you. But in order to do that, sometimes we have to dig down a little bit deeper to get to what's underneath it all, what's underneath that craving. And that kind of craving goes back to this idea of hope. I want something out there that is outside of me that I can pin my hopes to be able to be something that I can place my faith in, my trust in. Okay, I'll also look at the trust definition. The idea of trust is more along the lines of, sort of having an unequivocal wisdom that that something is more intuitively, experientially, based on your own personal experience, to be true. And this is something that oftentimes we feel in our gut. We feel it in our body. We know when there are people around us who we can trust and that we feel good around and we don't feel are going to hurt us. And then there are people and situations where we just sort of, shake our head and walk away from and say, wow, I really don't think that this feels right to me. And sometimes we don't listen to that voice, and sometimes we try to march on and charge through something anyway. And we can get into some troubles there, some problems there. So this idea of having trust based on wisdom and experiential knowledge, as opposed to sort of bits of information that we acquire and accumulate through our minds, through our brains, through our, sort of hard drive and storing stuff in there, instead sort of having it emanate from within. That's kind of what we're going for. So let me take this back a step. The idea of having hope is, really wanting to be able to say, listen, I believe that tomorrow is going to be a better day. But what I'm inviting you to consider is, why is this moment, right now, precisely as it is, and you, as you are, right now, precisely as you are, why is that not enough? Right? Because if we can sink into accepting ourselves, our lives, the situations around us precisely as they are at this moment, that's when things can begin to change. That's when things can begin to open. That's when there can be a shift. Now, I was listening to one of my teachers this morning. He said, if the guru is within, meaning the teacher, meaning the thing that teaches you, not so much the guru from some particular outside source, right? So if the teacher is within you, where do you bow? You have to surrender to your life as your teacher. Let me repeat that. If the guru is within, where do you bow? You have to surrender to your life, to your own life, as your teacher. This is Krishna Das, whom I love. He sings kirtan. And so what we're looking at is really trying to establish a sense of trust within ourselves that is able to be our own guide, so we don't pin our hopes and dreams on external events, because what we know that we cannot control is whatever happens out there. We can try to do the footwork, but we can't ultimately control what's out there. We can, however, control what's in here and what we do with our own bodies and minds and hearts. So as we look at pulling into our own inner wisdom, and we rest in a state of really a deep knowledge that regardless of our circumstances, regardless of whether we have a few pounds to lose, or whether or not we are a little bit sick, or whether or not we are jobless, or whether or not we are girlfriend or boyfriendless, or going through divorce, or any number of circumstances that would otherwise perturb us, when we can pull back and have an inner trust in the fact that we're actually still okay, we are still okay, and that we're not just flying solo, flapping in the breeze. We are actually connected interdependently with every other living creature. Meaning, for every, I think this was like high school science class or something, for every action there's an equal and opposite reaction. Well, we see it. If you push something, it'll push the other way, right? If you do this, it'll do this. It's like, thumb wrestling when you were a kid. So that's sort of the way that the whole balance of life works. That's why there's a certain pH balance in, again, scientific terms in our bodies. And that's why we are looking for that kind of pH balance sort of at a macro level for our life. So when we're trying to pin our hopes on stuff that's happening out there, we're always going to be disappointed because we can't control that. We can control, however, what we do and how we relate to that. What gets in the way of how we relate to whatever the situations are out there is because we have particular ideas, fixed ideas, convictions even, about what it is that we think should happen and what it is that we want to happen, and we have attachments to that. We don't have yet enough trust and faith in our own inner wisdom that the right thing will eventually come along. So why is that? Often because we haven't yet quite totally figured out how to point our intentions on the North Star of what it is that is right action and making sense for us in terms of our lives being all oriented toward a loving awareness that is interdependent and that is already wise within us. We oftentimes will, expect that somebody else knows more than we do, or that we aren't somehow able to really be in charge of our own lives. But what Krishna Das was saying this morning in this lecture was, if the guru is within, where do you bow? You don't go bow to someone else. You bow to yourself in the morning, in the sense that you recognize that you have the power of choice within you to be able to say, what is it that I can do today in terms of mindful eating, for example? Can I choose to eat, some yogurt and fruit as opposed to, a candy bar for breakfast, for example? Can I choose to, in my moment of despair and sorrow, rather than open up a bag of Oreos, can I sit there and instead of doing that say, wow, I'm just going to allow myself to be sad? Because we often spend a lot of time trying to avert ourselves from what we perceive are negative emotions or undesirable states like sadness or grief or mourning. And our culture certainly supports that. We don't have a lot of support for, grieving and really kind of feeling our feelings fully. And instead we sort of stuff them like a super stuffed Oreo, right? And then we stuff ourselves with that, which is fine with culture, because then they can sell us more junk food, and then they can sell us Weight Watchers, and then they can sell us super clothes and workout routines and Bowflex and whatever. Who needs it? Nobody needs it, except for whatever the marketers are that want to, peddle those things. So if we can get to a point where we recognize our own feelings and we actually feel the full feeling of sadness and not judge it. If we are feeling sad, instead of reaching for that bag of Oreos or reaching for that, tub of ice cream or whatever it is that, you might want to do, or making that nasty phone call or shooting off that email or whatever it is that we do when we get stressed because something out there that we have pinned our hopes on hasn't manifested or isn't manifesting yet, it requires that we have an ability to sit quietly with ourselves and just sort of recognize what we're thinking and feeling without totally attaching ourselves to those thoughts being the story of our life. Because the thoughts, although they're real to us, this is a quote Tara Brach, another one of my teachers often uses, and she attributes it to a Tibetan master, so that our thoughts are often real, but they're not true. I'll repeat that. Our thoughts are often real, but they're not true. Meaning that they're real to us, right? We have certain ideas or beliefs or concepts about who we are or how things should be or whatever. But how do we really know? If we aren't continuously maintaining a sense of curiosity about what's happening out there in the world, how do we really know what is best for us? We kind of don't. We have to kind of see over the course of time what works and what doesn't for us. And I think I mentioned on my last Facebook Live chat that, I just realized flour and sugar don't really work for me. I've tried them for a long time. And alcohol doesn't really work for me. I tried it for a long time. So I don't do those things anymore. It's fine. I don't miss it. And I'm grateful to not have that be a continued pull and have there be some part of me that hopes that I could one day eat pizza. Of course I can eat pizza. In the democracy that we live in, you can do whatever you want. We've been sold a bill of goods of choice. And with that sense of choice, we've been also told that we can, at any point in time, do whatever it is that we want to do. And nobody's going to tell us any differently. So if I want to have whiskey, I'm going to have whiskey. And if I want to eat pizza or spaghetti, I can do that. That's fine. You can. The question is, does it work for you? And if it isn't working for you, and you hope that it would, then they say that's the definition of insanity, right? You keep on repeating the same behavior, hoping for a different result. There's that word again, hope. So how can we shift from hope to faith and trust? How can we shift from pinning our ideas of having something manifest out there that we don't really have control over to having there be something within us that we do have control over? And as I started to say on Friday, I really think that the baseline of all of this at a fundamental level has to be a certain degree of self-acceptance and of self-love. When you came out of your mother's womb, there was nothing wrong with you. And guess what? Just because you've lived on the planet for this long, people have told you certain things about yourself, you have a little inner critic that's yapping at you all the time, picking you apart, none of that conditioning is actually who you are. What is who you are is that perfect person, that perfect being that came out of your mother's womb. And then, yes, there's conditioning and things that you regret and things you could have done differently in terms of actions. So you can have some compassion for those actions that weren't entirely skillful. And when you make missteps, if you will, along the way, even though you have good intentions, but you do not have to stay stuck there. That is not fundamentally who you are. Who you are is already perfect. So take heart in that. Take heart in that. Ground yourself in that. Breathe deeply on that. Sit quietly. Tend and befriend yourself, again, as Tara Brach would say. Embrace yourself with the tenderness that you would give a little baby in your arms if you were swaddling her or him and cradling her or him. You wouldn't be mean to them. Hold your inner 5-month-old gently and tenderly. And don't be sappy about it. Don't think it's weird. Because if you can't be friends with yourself, and you can't actually, with gentleness and tenderness, start to love yourself in that way that you would hold a little kitten or a puppy or a baby, or the way that you would admire a beautiful flower or a rose or a sunset. If you can't feel that within yourself at some point about yourself, and the only voice you hear in your head 90% of the time is that inner critic that's telling you what's wrong, then no matter what you try to pin your hopes on, you won't be able to make the shift from that hope to that sense of faith and trust in yourself and your own ability to do stuff, because that'll always get in the way. That inner critic is your ego. It's the conditioning. It's all that junk that has been put on you by society, by ill-attuned caregivers, by family members perhaps even, that, maybe you have yet to fully forgive, but you can set your intention on forgiving, right? Every day. And then every day, just like everything else is practice, we can practice the idea of coming home to ourselves. Because we inhabit ourselves 24/7. We live in an apartment. We live in the United States. I happen to live in New York. But the one place that's always home for me is this body. So if I'm not in a certain place of friendliness and at home with that, then that's really not a very hospitable arena to be in. And so I would invite you to consider how to begin to shift your relationship toward yourself to one of kindness. And a lot of people have called it self-compassion. I think that it's terrific to be compassionate and self-compassionate toward any kind of actions that you may do that you don't find skillful or helpful or may have harmed others or yourself, and you kind of want to break that pattern. But remember, you yourself are already perfect. You came out of the womb that way. That never changed. So I'm going to close, because this is getting long, with the idea of maybe inviting a little bit more trust in your own inner wisdom, your own inner sense of faith and grounding in your own self, and kind of, not so much worry about hope and the stuff that's happening out there. Let's think a little bit more about the way that we can cultivate through daily practice of breathing, resting in our own inner goodness, tending and befriending ourselves, and then being able to use that as a basis for faith and trust and self-love that then can manifest into self-care. And that self-care and those boundaries aren't about being bitchy to people and saying no all the time and, refusing access to you. It's about putting yourself in the equation, making sure that you know that you matter, and that instead of going out for a pizza with your friends, you might say, listen, I'm going to go for a walk. If you want to join me, that would be great. So maybe we put hope on the back burner for 2017. Maybe instead we cultivate wisdom within ourselves. We tap into that, and we cultivate our faith and our ability to tend and befriend ourselves and begin to see things that we can inhabit and that we can direct and that we can set our intentions on as possible manifestations for us in 2017, as opposed to something external to us. Let's bow to ourselves, not to the guru out there necessarily, and let's use our life as an example. Let's use our own life. This is the practice ground every day. And let's rest in the beauty of the present moment, not in yesterday that was gone or tomorrow that hasn't come, but the beauty of the present moment and also the inner perfection that you already are. We all are already fine. Let's try to work on accepting that and then see where we can't go from there. All right, everybody, thanks for watching. Find me if you want on private message, if you want to send me some ideas or send me an email or any of those things. I think you know how to reach me. My handles on social media are at Francesca Maxime. This is WiseGirl on Facebook Live. Thanks so much for joining me. Hope it was helpful. Bye.